CBS News. Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan, Sunday on CBS.
Tonight, people in the Midwest brace for dual weather hazards, extreme heat, and wildfire smoke. Then, why finding deals at the grocery store literally comes down to where you're looking. Plus, a new experiment to prevent head injuries in the Women's World Cup on the CBS Evening News.
Plea deals, yes, they can fall apart, but when you have had both sides have such lengthy negotiations, that it does surprise me. I wish I could say I expected it. I did not.
I want to see justice move forward for Hunter Biden and hope that he'll acknowledge his responsibility.
Oh, I mean, it sounds like it was rife with all kinds of irregularities.
People think like I'm taking incoming now. I was taking way more incoming in 2020, let me tell you.
Hello, I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to America Decides. A plea agreement between federal prosecutors and Hunter Biden fell apart Wednesday. The judge refused to sign off on a deal that would have seen the president's son enter a guilty plea to 2 misdemeanor tax charges and enter a diversion program in lieu of pleading guilty to a felony gun possession count. After the deal collapsed, Hunter Biden entered a not guilty plea. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is floating an impeachment inquiry into President Biden over unproven claims of financial misconduct. He said Tuesday the move is the only way for Congress to get to the truth. To unpack all of this, we have 2 pros, Catherine Herridge and Scott McFarland, joining us now. Catherine is CBS News senior investigative correspondent joining us from Wilmington, and Scott is CBS News congressional correspondent joining us from the Hill. Catherine, I want to begin with you in this Hunter Biden case. I know you were inside the courtroom when this all happened. Huge shock to everybody watching. What exactly did the judge say about this plea agreement today? How did it fall apart?
Well, Caitlin, good to be with you. The judge in this case, Mary Ellen Nakaya, she said that she had serious reservations, including constitutional questions, about the agreement, and that she needed more information before she could either accept it or reject it. There was one moment, I think, that was really the turning point. There was a recess. The defense counsel, Chris Clark, started talking with a member of the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they were clearly discussing the deal itself and whether it would limit future criminal charges against Hunter Biden. And this member of the U.S. Attorney team said, that's not the agreement. And Chris Clark said, well, then I guess we just rip it up. And that, to me, like, it just kind of unraveled from that point.
And what is Hunter Biden's legal team planning to do after all of this?
Well, the judge has said to both parties that they have 2 weeks to file more information to answer her questions about this deal and to come to a meeting of the minds on the scope of the agreement. Is it a broad global agreement that limits future criminal charges? Or, as the U.S. Attorney's Office said today, there's an ongoing investigation and there could be more charges. But I would say that after a hearing like today, the bar is even higher for the judge to sign off on this agreement, though it's still possible.
Yeah, that does seem like a high bar, and something that, a lot of people, legal experts, found really surprising that it could unravel in public view. What happens next? What's coming down the pike in this case?
Well, in terms of the timetable and the tick-tock here, it's 2 weeks for the parties to answer the judge's questions. And then she said in about 30 days, she's going to make an assessment as to whether her questions have been answered, and she can move forward on either accepting this plea agreement or rejecting the plea agreement. But I just want to note that there was a moment in the hearing where she said, okay, well, if this thing is not going to go forward, I guess we have to talk about a trial date. That's how far it got inside the courtroom behind me. They talked about sort of a preliminary motions hearing leading up to a trial in early September.
So this could stretch on for some time. Well, Catherine Herridge, thank you for your reporting tonight and all day today. And let's move over to Capitol Hill, where Republican lawmakers were very quick to respond to what happened in Wilmington today. Scott McFarland joins us now and has been covering all of this. So, Scott, Hunter Biden has been really at the center of House Republicans, especially their inquiries into the Biden administration. What's been the reaction over this plea deal falling apart?
It's a shot of adrenaline for Republican investigations into Hunter Biden and into these many multi-fold investigations that the U.S. House Republican majority has started since January. James Comer, the Kentucky Republican who chairs the House Oversight Committee, said in a post late today that the judge saw the red flag, that the judge saw the problem indicative of what he's been characterizing as a sweetheart deal cut by the Department of Justice with Hunter Biden. What Republicans are saying today is that this is indicative of what they've been saying for months, that this deal, that this Department of Justice arrangement that was on the table and then collapsed today with Hunter Biden is indicative of what they've characterized as a two-tier system of justice, a weaponization of justice that favors the Biden administration and, in this case, the Biden family. Democrats are going to respond pretty forcefully here, saying that there is a false equivalence that continues to be made by Republicans between Hunter Biden and the multifold criminal issues and charges against former President Trump, which could accelerate again tomorrow or next week if that grand jury returns an indictment for the January 6th investigation of former President Trump. It really is a Rorschach test, this moment, as so much has been lately, of where you stand politically, what you make of this news.
Yeah, you call it a shot of adrenaline for House Republicans. Something else kind of fueling them at this point is Kevin McCarthy saying that he may be open to opening an impeachment inquiry into Biden. I want to play a little sound of what he had to say on Capitol Hill today.
Well, we have to find at the end if the justice system is fair to all Americans and not one system for the Biden Inc. family and another for America.
All right, so Scott, what exactly is McCarthy doing here? And are there any grounds on which to open an impeachment inquiry into Biden?
Whether he's trying to or not, Caitlin, he is threading a political needle here by invoking this phrase so much today and so much this week. Impeachment inquiry. What he's been saying is that an impeachment inquiry may be necessary, if not imminent, as a better tool for the U.S. House to investigate the Biden administration. That it opens up some more doors for their investigations into President Biden, his administration, and his son. Impeachment is a word that may satisfy the rest of House Freedom Caucus, which has been calling for the impeachment of not just President Biden, but the Homeland Security Secretary, the Attorney General, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, the FBI Director. He's getting pushed from the Freedom Caucus to get aggressive about impeachment efforts by using the phrase impeachment inquiry. He's, in a sense, talking impeachment without really threatening impeachment itself.
Threading the needle indeed there. Scott, I want to move over to the other side of Capitol Hill, where you had a really remarkable moment from Senator Mitch McConnell freezing during a press conference. What happened there? What is his team saying about how he's doing?
A staffer tells CBS News what you're about to see, the moment you're about to see, was an episode of lightheadedness for Senator McConnell. His other colleagues in the Senate have said, but just before this happened and just after this happened, he seemed fine, and at this moment seems fine. But take a listen and a look at what happened mid-afternoon today.
We're on a path to finishing the NDA this week. Has been good bipartisan cooperation and a string of
one of his leadership colleagues, John Barrasso, a Republican from Wyoming, came over and motioned Senator McConnell away from the podium. He didn't leave the area. He did come back a few minutes later and then start taking questions and answering questions. His staff, or at least one staffer, has characterized this as lightheadedness. Other staffers and other colleagues have said he is just fine now. That's obviously a distinctive and striking moment that occurred before the nation's cameras and the national audience earlier today.
Yeah, especially jarring to see it and watch that unfold. Of course, we wish him well and have more questions to come. Scott McFarland, thank you for covering all of these threads for us tonight from the Capitol. And amid staff layoffs and declining poll numbers, Governor Ron DeSantis' 2024 campaign is looking for a reboot. We'll ask the founder of a DeSantis super PAC about that campaign reset next. You're streaming America Decides.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
it's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, oh, we're going to tell you about that too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
the threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
The carnage in our nation's schools has become painfully repetitive.
Not one more child!
School shootings have parents fighting mad.
I promised my daughter I was going to fight. It's going to keep on happening.
And teachers taking lessons in how to fight back.
This is an exercise.
We approach it as it's you or them.
It shouldn't have to be your teacher's job to protect your life.
But will the battle over gun control,
People are afraid that they're going to lose their gun rights altogether.
be the hardest lesson of all?
The exercise, you're having to shoot at an adult. Are you prepared to have to kill one of your students?
Guns in the Classroom, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She's the most successful alpine skier, male or female, ever, and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
When you're standing up to do the right things, some of the things you all have done in your legislatures, what we've done in Florida, you are going to face blowback. They're going to sling arrows at you. They're going to call you names. They're going to lie about you. They're going to smear you. And the question is, are you going to stand your ground or are you going to fold?
And welcome back to America Decides. That was Governor Ron DeSantis earlier today speaking at the annual American Legislative Exchange Council meeting in Orlando. This says his campaign has cut more than a third of its staff, the total number of 38 people, in what is being referred to as a campaign reset. Well, Ken Cuccinelli joins us now. He previously served in the Trump administration as acting DHS Deputy Secretary, and he founded the Never Back Down Super PAC, which is supporting Governor Ron DeSantis' 2024 presidential bid. Good to see you. Thanks so much for being here. Governor DeSantis launched his campaign just 2 months ago, and the campaign is already calling this a reset. Are you concerned about the campaign having to make this kind of course correction already?
No, I'm glad to see them slimming down. I think that when you see it combined with the retail politics they're putting on the schedule, they're doing a bus tour with us in the next few days in Iowa, And what we find is when the governor connects up with people in small groups or one at a time, a few dozen, a few hundred, they warm up to him. And his great record in Florida gets a personal aspect to it. They learn about him paying his way through college and being the only veteran running. Those are important details that help people get to know him, and they put meat on the bones of his excellent record as governor. And we see that growing as a movement. We've knocked on over 1 million doors on his behalf now, and we're seeing the gradual pickup of support across all the areas where we're working, and we're knocking on doors beyond the first 4 states.
Yeah, I want to ask a little bit more about that bus tour in a moment, but what specific changes do you want to see from the candidate?
Well, being at the super PAC, we play follow the leader here a bit. I mean, I am happy to see the kind of retail politicking I described in the bus tour. I mean, the super PAC set that up and then invited the candidate, and they either accept or decline. And we like to see that sort of acceptance for those sorts of events. So that kind of grassroots focus is kind of where I come from in politics. I believe in changing hearts and minds one at a time. I believe it works, and I believe that the governor has a great message of accomplishment that matches a great national vision that conservatives are looking for right now. So I think it's a good combination.
And when you look at the polling in early states, it seems like it's been a pretty stagnant race with Donald Trump maintaining a lead. Can you give us kind of a timeline of when you would want to see kind of tangible results or movement from DeSantis?
Well, certainly as we get closer to the end of this year and we're turning the corner on actual voting in the early 2024 is when we would be looking for that. And that's what we're building toward. Between now and then, there'll be debates of however many types. There'll be an awful lot of other events like not just Alec today, but other incidences, comments on RFK Jr. today, I thought caught a lot of people's attention. It really plays up his COVID leadership, where he's shined so spectacularly, especially compared to most everybody else running. Those things come one at a time. And we have 6 months to go. The latest New Hampshire poll had him closing 1/3 of the gap since April, and that's in 3 months, and there's 6 months to go. On that pace, New Hampshire's a dead heat between DeSantis and Trump, and everybody else is far behind. That's not a terrible place to be. Obviously, we want him to win it, and we're going to work very hard to help him win it. But this is going to be a slow building process.
I mean, you mentioned his handling of COVID. That's one area where he's attacked former President Donald Trump over, but really on everything else, especially on the legal woes that the former president is facing. We haven't really seen DeSantis or other candidates really go after Trump on that. I mean, you would imagine that as a big vulnerability for the front runner, Donald Trump. Do you want to see DeSantis go after Trump more forcefully and kind of change the trajectory of this race that way?
Where I think he's going after him on that subject is appointing people like Christopher Wray and then complaining about Christopher Wray and complaining about the deep state when he appointed so many of the people to what he characterizes as the deep state. And then DeSantis then turns that to his own vision for how he's going to uproot the deep state. And I think he has been more comprehensive about that than any other candidate running. Donald Trump just says, I'll fix it in 6 months. Well, you had 4 years and you didn't. And in fact, you appointed many of the people you've been complaining about since you appointed them. So it really shines a light on one of Donald Trump's terrible weaknesses, and that is his incredible inconsistency in his own appointments. Usually those are people who are entirely supportive of your agenda, and that's what we've seen in the Florida government with Governor DeSantis. We did not see that in the Trump administration. When I was deputy secretary, I had to fight through the White House to try and accomplish the president's own agenda. And that's just not something that Governor DeSantis falls down on.
Yeah, but we haven't really seen those attacks breaking through at this point. I mean, is this something that he needs to be more forceful and overt about? I mean, it seems like a tricky balancing act given that the former president has such a hold on the Republican Party base at this point.
So how aggressive to be in any direction is always a touchy question. And for us at the Super PAC, we follow the lead of the candidate. The governor has dealt with 4 of the largest media markets who've been very challenging to him for the last 5 years. He hasn't made any mistakes in that regard. I think that's good preparation for both debates and for dealing with the president directly, if the president will ever engage directly. So far, he's saying he won't come to the debates, but we'll see if that changes later. And I think the governor is going about this the right way, where he's focusing his criticism on policy differences like COVID, where President Trump has doubled down on all of the bad decisions he made in COVID, and on the many personnel. It isn't just Christopher Wray. We could go through a long list of mistakes by Donald Trump that were sort of known by those of us on the Republican side to be mistakes when he did them, and he went ahead and did it anyway, and then didn't remove them when they were a problem. So, he talks a good game right now, but he didn't deliver the good game that he talks about. And Governor DeSantis did do that. He walked the walk. He didn't just talk the talk.
And we'll see DeSantis and Trump in the same venue later this week in Iowa. Speaking of Iowa, your PAC is hosting DeSantis on a bus tour later this week. Federal law prohibits super PACs like yours from coordinating with campaigns. So how exactly is this legal?
Oh, so we can set up events and then invite them to come. They just can't have any input on what happens at the event. For instance, so we set up a bus tour, proposed it to the campaign, and they either say yes or no. And that's why it's legal. They don't have any control over the arrangements made. So we stay completely outside of coordinating.
Is that kind of going right into that gray line?
No, that's not stretching it at all. No, if it were, we're not getting near any gray lines. The ground we're trotting is well trod. We're doing what others before us have done, and the FEC has dealt with all these issues. We're not playing fast and loose at all. We're being very tight to stay inside the lines.
All right, Ken Cuccinelli, we will be watching DeSantis on that bus tour later this week on the ground in Iowa. Thank you so much for your time and being with us today. We appreciate it. And when we come back, we'll look ahead to next month's Republican primary debate that we were just talking about and discuss if that could be a boost to DeSantis' campaign. You're streaming America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, and fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman. Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur Serena Williams.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job? I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
And welcome back to America Decides. You just heard from Ken Cuccinelli. He's the head of the super PAC supporting Governor Ron DeSantis' bid for president. We're going to talk now with CBS News political reporter Aaron Navarro joining us now. And of course, he has been covering everything DeSantis campaign for us here. I know you've been following him for a while before he even announced. And I know, there's been a lot of talk about what this shakeup, reset, firing of staff means for the campaign. I know you've been talking to donors too, and that's often when we start to get some insights about how they're feeling about candidates that they're supporting. What have you been hearing in terms of how they view this reset?
Right, and it's interesting because they're also hearing from the top campaign brass that may not be talking to the press directly. But there was a retreat of these donors, bundlers in Park City, Utah. And the overall message I got from that was the campaign and DeSantis acknowledged that there needs to be a change, that there needs to be kind of a pivot, a reset. They talked about a, quote unquote, meaner, leaner campaign, talked about right sizing. So not explicitly talking about the staff cuts, but alluding to it and also making sure that they are focused on the first 4 presidential primary states. It was interesting hearing Cuccinelli talk about how the PAC is focused on Super Tuesday, on a lot of that groundwork, and they obviously have a lot of funds to be able to do that. But when you look at the DeSantis campaign and him, they think that all funds, all attention needs to be paid to Iowa and New Hampshire.
So we expect DeSantis to be spending a lot more time in Iowa.
That's right.
You heard Cuccinelli also say that and we've heard this too from supporters of DeSantis, that they want him to kind of be meeting voters one-on-one and kind of focusing there. He's heading to Iowa later this week. He'll be there with a lot of other candidates. I'm curious kind of, and I asked Cuccinelli this, but I'm curious from what you've been hearing from donors about what kind of timeline they want to see some kind of movement here. Are they putting an emphasis on that debate, which is, I think, just exactly a month from now?
That's right. And that was kind of the message from the top brass in the campaign as well, is that this next debate will be a big point for DeSantis and just the race in general. And you look at the big question on whether Trump goes or not. From talking to donors that were at this retreat, it seems that DeSantis, his campaign, are preparing for both scenarios. They're also preparing for whether the candidates that are on stage that aren't named Donald Trump are going to go after DeSantis. And they're expecting, from Chris Christie, maybe Tim Scott. But one other message I got was the campaign wants to make it clear and portray the confidence that this is a 2-man race. They're saying, they kind of warned some of the donors, listen, you might see a moment here or there from Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy. It won't last. DeSantis has the funds, kind of the profile that they think can last longer in this race.
So that's really interesting because he came into this race kind of positioning himself as the clear alternative. But, when you spend some time in Iowa and we've been talking to voters, you do sense kind of an openness or eagerness to hear from a lot of different candidates. I'm curious, how the super PAC is, building that kind of ground effort that is so key in a place like Iowa. So even, as the campaign is kind of suffering with spending and money issues, the super PAC is super well funded.
Yeah, and they've been hosting a couple events in Iowa and New Hampshire. I went to the July 4th parade, which is super PAC was put on by them. And it's making sure that the door canvassing operation. So the moments where DeSantis is not there, but his message is still being spread out, is something that super PAC has been handling, which is a bit unprecedented. $100 million going into voter mobilization. And that's kind of been the big focus so far in Iowa and New Hampshire, but also in big delegate states like California, they have staff building up there. So it's interesting to see the difference in the super PAC funds versus a campaign that maybe spent a bit more than it should have.
Yeah, and you bring up a really important point, which is this is all about delegates, how much you can amass, and that's been a key focus of the Trump campaign, having been through this before. I also want to ask you just really quickly about RFK Jr. has been mentioned. You heard Cuccinelli talk about that. What did DeSantis say about him today?
It's interesting. He keeps getting asked, would you make RFK Jr. Your vice president, your running mate on the ticket? And DeSantis and him do have overlap on some of the COVID skepticism. RFK Jr. Obviously has spread and talked about some conspiracy theories that are a bit way out there. But DeSantis today said, after being pressed a bit on whether he would make him VP, that he would appoint him to lead the CDC or FDA, which had many conservatives kind of eyes pop, just given RFK Jr.'s background.
Yeah, given those very, very controversial claims. Well, Aaron Navarro, I know you've been covering all things DeSantis and will continue to, so we should all follow you and your reporting. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. And that does it for us today. You can stream America Decides Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.
It's a history-making meeting. 4 extraordinary women who are all 4-star generals and admirals. How did you deal with being discriminated against?
I just worked harder.
The future of an ever-evolving U.S. military when we go person to person.
Stories start with the who, what, when, and where.